Don't serve him. Those three words hit the room like a thunderclap. Victoria Langford's CEO owner, the woman who signed every paycheck in that building, said it loud enough for everyone to hear. Loud enough to make sure nobody missed it. And every single person in that restaurant froze. Every person except one. Margaret Whitmore, 62 years old, 27 years behind that counter, picked up a menu, walked straight past her boss, and placed it on the table in front of the man everyone was afraid of. Sit down, sweetheart. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days. If this story moves you, please subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and follow along all the way to the end, because what happens next will stay with you for a long time. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The front door of Silver Oak Family Restaurant opened at 7:43 on a Thursday evening. Most people didn't even look up at first. It was a busy night. Every table was filled. The sound of silverware and conversation, and the soft crackle of the kitchen filled the air. Families finishing their dinners, couples leaning close over their plates, a group of older men in the corner booth arguing about football with the kind of passion that only men over 60 seem to have anymore. It was the kind of night Margaret Whitmore loved. Controlled chaos. People fed and warm and together. She was carrying 2 plates to table 7 when she heard it, that particular kind of silence. Not the natural quiet that falls between sentences. The other kind, the held breath kind. The kind that only happens when a room full of people decides, all at once, to stop what they're doing and look at the same thing. Margaret set the plates down without spilling a drop, 27 years of practice, and followed every other pair of eyes in the restaurant toward the door. The man standing there was tall, 6'2", maybe 6'3", and the kind of height that fills a door frame. His hair was gray, pulled back, and his beard was long and full and streaked with silver at the edges. His boots were worn in the way that only real miles wear boots down, not fashion, not style, but actual road. Actual distance. Actual life lived on the move. His leather vest carried patches the way a soldier's jacket carries medals. And right there, dead center, visible from 20 feet away, the Hells Angels patch. The room didn't just go quiet, it went cold. Margaret watched it happen the way she'd watched 100 uncomfortable things happen over 27 years. The subtle shift. The way a mother pulled her child slightly closer without even realizing she was doing it. The way a man at the counter pretended to look at his phone, but kept his eyes up. The way 2 younger waitresses near the dessert station exchanged a look that said everything they weren't saying out loud. The man stood there and absorbed all of it. He didn't look angry. He didn't look threatening. He looked tired, not sleepy tired. Something deeper, the kind of tired that doesn't go away after one night of rest. The kind of tired that lives behind the eyes and settles into the shoulders and makes a person's whole body look like it's carrying something that nobody else can see. He scanned the room slowly, looking for an empty table. Just an empty table. That was all. And then Victoria Langford appeared. Margaret had noticed her arrive earlier that evening. Victoria didn't visit the Silver Oak location often, maybe 3 or 4 times a year. When she did, the energy of the whole restaurant shifted. The younger staff got nervous. Even Kevin, the manager, who was usually relaxed and steady, had a habit of straightening his collar every time Victoria walked past. She was in her mid-50s, professionally dressed even for a casual restaurant visit. The kind of woman who had learned early that the way you carried yourself was the first thing people decided about you. And she had built an entire identity around never letting anyone forget she was the one in charge. She stepped forward before the man had taken 3 steps inside. Her voice was quiet, controlled. But the restaurant was so silent that Margaret heard every word. Don't serve him. The man stopped. He heard it too. Of course he heard it. The whole room heard it. The couple near the window. The family with the kids. The old football argument in the corner booth. Everything stopped. Everyone heard. Margaret watched the man's face. This was the moment she knew when most people either got angry or got small. He did neither. He simply lowered his eyes, The way a person does when they've heard something before. And when the words aren't new. When the experience of being unwanted in a room is so familiar that it no longer even produces shock, just a kind of heavy, quiet resignation. And he turned around. He was going to leave. And something in Margaret Whitmore shifted. And she couldn't have explained it in that moment. She couldn't have given you a philosophical argument or a speech about dignity or justice. It wasn't that kind of thing. It was something older and simpler than that. And something her own mother had pressed into her when she was 7 years old, standing outside a grocery store in rural Georgia, watching a man be turned away because of the color of his skin. And her mother had said very quietly, "The worst thing a person can do is look at another human being and decide they're less." And Margaret picked up a menu. Margaret Victoria's voice turned sharp and low. Margaret was already moving. I said, "Don't serve him." And she walked past her boss. And she walked to the table by the window, the small one, and tucked slightly away from the center of the room, and the one she always thought of as the breathing room table, and the one she seated people at when they looked like they needed a moment to just exist without being watched. And she placed the menu down. The man had stopped walking toward the door, and he was standing with his back half turned, like he wasn't quite sure yet if he'd heard what he thought he'd heard. And Margaret looked at him. "Sit down, sweetheart," she said. And "You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." And the silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. And Margaret counted them later. 4 seconds where nobody in Silver Oak Family Restaurant moved or spoke or breathed loud enough to matter. And then the man sat down. He didn't say anything right away. And he pulled out the chair carefully, deliberately, the way a man does when he's trying not to draw more attention to himself. And he sat down and he put both hands flat on the table and he looked at the menu. And his hands were large, scared across the knuckles. And the hands of someone who had worked with them for decades, not just held a pen. And Margaret stood beside the table. "I'm Margaret," she said. "And I'll take care of you tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink? We've got fresh sweet tea, just made an hour ago. And coffee, water if you want something simple." The man looked up at her. And his eyes were dark brown. And in them, Margaret saw something she recognized immediately. The way you recognize something you've seen in your own mirror. On the worst nights, a grief so old it had stopped being sharp and had become instead a kind of permanent weight. And "Sweet tea," he said. His voice was low, a little rough around the edges, the way voices get when they haven't had a real conversation in a while. And "Please." "Coming right up," she said. She turned back toward the counter. And Victoria was waiting for her. And "You just cost yourself this job." Victoria said it quietly enough that it could have passed as a private conversation, but she made sure she was standing exactly where at least 4 employees could hear her. And "You understand that?" Margaret looked at her. In 27 years, she had disagreed with managers. And she had navigated bad policies and unreasonable customers and nights when everything fell apart at once. And she had never not once been someone who looked for conflict. But she had also never been someone who could watch a man be turned away from a table like he was less than human and simply go back to wiping down the counter. And "Victoria," she said, "that man walked in here looking for dinner. And that's all. He sat down and he ordered sweet tea and he said, 'Please.' And I don't know what else you need him to do. That patch on his vest is a patch on a vest," Margaret said. "It doesn't tell me his name. And it doesn't tell me who he loves or what he's lost or why he's sitting alone on a Thursday night looking like the whole world has forgotten him. And a patch doesn't tell me any of that." Victoria's expression shifted, not softer, harder. "This conversation isn't finished," she said. And "Go do your job. I am doing my job," Margaret said. And she went to get the sweet tea. And she brought it out in one of the tall glasses, the good ones. And the ones they usually saved for the tables closer to the window. And the man, he hadn't said his name yet, was still looking at the menu, but his eyes had stopped moving across the page. And he was just holding it. The way people hold something when they need something to do with their hands. And "The meatloaf is good tonight," Margaret said, setting the tea down. And "One of our regulars has been ordering it every Thursday for about 11 years, and that man has never once been wrong about food. And the chicken fried steak is also solid. But if you haven't eaten much today, the pot roast is what I'd push you toward. And it'll stay with you." The man looked up at her again. Earned. Something had changed in his face, slightly. The way a door that's been closed for a long time opens just a fraction of an inch when the pressure on the other side finally eases. You didn't have to do that, he said, quietly, looking at her directly. Earned. Back there, you didn't have to do that. Sure I did, Margaret said simply. Earned. It's going to cause you trouble. Probably, she agreed. Earned. Pot roast? He almost smiled. It didn't quite get all the way there, but it came close enough that Margaret counted it. Earned, he said. Good choice, she said. I'll get that in for you. Earned. His name was Daniel. He told her that 20 minutes later, when she came back to check on the food. Earned. Daniel Hayes. He offered his hand the same way people used to offer hands before the world got smaller and more cautious, fully, firmly, with eye contact. Earned. Margaret Whitmore, she said, shaking it. 27 years at this counter. That's a long time, he said. It is, she agreed. And you travel? I do, he said, a lot. On your own? And he was quiet for a moment. Mostly now. She didn't push. She'd learned decades ago that when people say mostly and go quiet afterward, the story behind that word is when they'll tell you when they're ready and not a moment before. And, well, she said, holler if you need anything. She went back to her other tables. Earned. But she watched him. Not the way people in the restaurant were watching him with their sideways glances and their careful not looking. Earned. She watched him the way she'd learned to watch people over 27 years of feeding them. Earned. The way a person sits tells you something. The way they hold their silverware. Earned. Whether they eat fast because they're hungry or slow because they're distracted. Daniel Hayes ate slowly. Not because he was distracted. Earned. Because he was savoring it. The way a man eats when he can't remember the last time someone cooked for him. She went back twice more that evening. Once to refill the sweet tea. Earned. Once to ask if he wanted pie they had fresh peach. Earned. Just made that afternoon. Earned. She told him. Earned. Because it was true. And also because she had a feeling he would say yes. Earned. He did. He ate the pie slowly too. And when she brought the check he looked at it, and then he looked up at her. Margaret. Why did you do it? He asked. Really? Earned. Not the short answer. She thought about it for a moment. Earned. Because you reminded me of someone, she said. Who? Earned. My father, she said. He was a big man. Worked construction all his life. Earned. Came home every night with the road on him, his clothes on his face. Earned. People saw the dirt and the size, and they made up their mind about who he was before he ever opened his mouth. She paused. Earned. He was the kindest man I've ever known. Daniel said nothing for a long moment. And then what happened to him? He got sick, she said. And too many years of too little care and too much hard work. Passed when I was 31. She picked up the empty pie plate. But he spent his whole life being seen wrong by people who never bothered to look closer. And I never forgot that. Daniel looked at her. I'm sorry about your father, he said. And he meant it. She could hear it, the genuine weight of it in his voice. The way real condolences sound different from polite ones. And thank you, she said. You have a safe ride tonight, Daniel. Yes, ma'am, he said. He left a tip that was larger than the bill. And he came back the next Thursday, same time, same table. Margaret had it ready for him. Sweet tea waiting. And menu already set. You didn't have to do that either, he said, sliding in. Earned. Third time you've told me I didn't have to do something, she said. Earned. I'm starting to think you might be the kind of person who doesn't let people do things for him very often. And he looked at her, and this time the almost smile made it all the way. And pot roast again, she asked. Pot roast again, he confirmed. And by the third week, she knew pieces of him. And he was from Texas originally. West Texas, the kind of flat, sun-hammered landscape that either breaks people or builds them into something harder and more honest than what the coast produces. And he had a brother had, past tense, and she noted the tense and didn't push who had served in the military. Earned. He had been riding motorcycles since he was 16 because he told her once the road was the only place where thinking felt clean. Earned. What do you mean clean, she asked. He thought about it. Earned. When you're riding, he said, there's nothing but what's in front of you. You can't carry the past with you. It's too loud. The wind takes it. He turned his sweet tea glass slowly on the table. And I learned that when my wife passed, that first year, and the road was the only place where I could breathe without it hurting. And Margaret was quiet. When did she pass, she asked. And 2 years ago, he said. September, I'm sorry, she said. 2 years, he said again, quietly, like he was testing the number. Still surprised by it even now. Some days it still feels like 2 weeks. And that doesn't go away, she said. Not unkindly, just honestly. But it changes. The weight of it changes. It gets not lighter, exactly. And different, more familiar. Like something you learn to carry instead of something that's crushing you. And he looked at her with an expression she'd seen before. And the look of someone who wants to believe that's true. And my grandmother used to say grief was just love with nowhere to go, she added. And he was quiet for a long time after that. Yeah, he said finally. And yeah, that's right. That's exactly what it feels like. Victoria Langford came back on a Tuesday. And she didn't announce it ahead of time. She rarely did. And she liked arriving unannounced. Margaret had always suspected it was because it was harder for people to perform if they didn't know they were being watched. And she walked through the restaurant doing what she always did. And observing, evaluating, her eyes moving over everything with the crisp efficiency of someone calculating value in real time. And she stopped when she saw Daniel at his usual table. And same table. Third week, same quiet man with the Hells Angels patch and the gray beard and the hands that had seen decades of hard work. And Margaret saw Victoria see him, and she watched Victoria's expression become very still and very deliberate, the kind of stillness that isn't calm, and the kind that comes right before a decision has been made. Victoria walked to the back. Margaret finished taking an order at table 12, brought out coffee to table 4, and then followed. And she knew what was coming. She had known it was coming since the first night. And the break room smelled like burnt coffee and the particular exhaustion that accumulates in a room where people spend their few minutes of rest before going back out to keep working. And Victoria was standing with her arms folded. And Kevin, the manager, was beside her. And Margaret could see in his face the expression of a man who didn't want to be there but couldn't find a way out. Close the door, Victoria said. Margaret closed it. That man, Victoria said. He's been back, he has, Margaret said. And every Thursday, Margaret agreed. And after I specifically told you, you told me not to serve him the first night, Margaret said. And I served him. He came back on his own after that. And I'm not going to turn away a paying customer who hasn't done a single thing wrong, Victoria. Not for a patch on a vest. Victoria unfolded her arms. And you think this is about a patch? I think this is about a patch, Margaret said. And Margaret. Victoria's voice shifted into something that was almost, but not quite, reasonable. And this restaurant is in a community. We have families here. And we have a reputation. When people walk in here and they see that symbol, the kind of symbol that is associated with. And with what? Margaret asked. With a tired man who orders pot roast and sweet tea and has never once raised his voice or caused any trouble in 27 years of this restaurant being open. And he's been here 3 weeks, Victoria said flatly. And not one person has had a problem with him being here, Margaret said. And not one complaint from a customer, not one incident. And nothing. Because he's not a problem. He's a person. And he's just a person who needs somewhere to sit and something to eat and maybe someone to treat him like he matters. And Victoria looked at her for a long moment. You're building a relationship with him, she said, like it was an accusation. I'm doing my job, Margaret said. And your job is to serve the customers I approve of. And the room went very quiet. Margaret felt something settle in her chest. And not anger, not fear, something older. Something that felt like the end of a long road finally coming into view. And that's not the job, she said softly. That's not what this job is. And you are, and Victoria said, I am the owner. And when I tell you not to serve someone, that is wrong, Margaret said. And Victoria blinked. In 27 years, no one had said that word to her like that. And flat, clear, quiet, without malice, but without compromise. And Victoria said, it's wrong, Margaret said again. And somewhere inside you, Victoria, you know it's wrong. And you know that the reason you're telling me not to serve that man has nothing to do with his behavior and everything to do with how he looks and what that patch represents to you. And I can't do that. I won't do that. Not after 27 years of believing that this counter is a place where people come and feel like they matter. She paused. And that's why people have been coming here for 27 years. And not the food, not the price, because they feel like they matter here. And the day I start deciding who gets to feel that way and who doesn't is the day this place stops being worth anything. The silence that followed was different. From the silence in the dining room had been 3 weeks ago, that silence had been shock. This one was something else. And recognition, maybe. The kind of moment where a person hears something they can't unhear, and they know it, and they hate it. Victoria's jaw tightened. "We're not finished discussing this," she said. "Okay," Margaret said, and she opened the door and went back to work. She stopped by Daniel's table on her way past. He was reading something on his phone. He looked up when she approached. "Everything all right?" he asked. He'd seen her go to the back. She'd been gone long enough. "Fine," she said. "Can I get you anything else?" He looked at her for a moment. "Margaret," he said. "Is this, am I causing trouble for you?" She met his eyes. "You're causing me to do my job the way it ought to be done," she said. "And that's not trouble. That's just Tuesday." He held her gaze. "I want you to know something," quietly, carefully, like someone choosing words after a long time of not using them this way. "What's that?" "The way you've treated me in this place," he said. "The way you've just seen me, without making up your mind beforehand." That's, he stopped. Started again. "I've been in a lot of rooms, and a lot of places. And most people make up their mind about me before I open my mouth. And I'm used to it. I've been used to it for a long time." He looked at his hands on the table. "But it still does something to you after a while. After enough rooms, it starts to feel like the truth. Like maybe they're right. Like maybe what they see is all there is." Margaret sat down across from him. She didn't have time. She had 4 other tables and the kitchen was backed up, and Kevin would give her a look. She sat down anyway. "Listen to me," she said. "What they see is not all there is. Not even close. I don't know your whole story, Daniel. You haven't told me and I haven't asked. But I know what I've seen in 3 weeks. I know you tipped the busboy $10 on a $12 check. I know last Thursday when that little girl at table 6 dropped her ice cream, you went to the counter and bought her another one before her mama could even get up. I know you hold the door and you say please, and you sit at this table by yourself, and I can see you thinking, really thinking, about something that matters to you. That's not nothing. That's not a patch on a vest. That's a person." Daniel looked at her. His eyes were bright, the kind of bright that has nothing to do with happiness. He looked down. He put his hand over his mouth, briefly a gesture she recognized. The thing people do when they're trying to hold something in that wants very badly to come out. He looked back up. "My brother," he said. "I came to Texas, this part of Texas, because of my brother." Margaret waited. "He died," Daniel said, 6 years ago. He was a Marine, served 2 tours, came home, and then went to work for a construction company because that was what he knew how to do. And then he stopped. His voice had changed, gone lower and rougher. They knew the conditions were dangerous. They had reports. They had warnings, they knew, and they didn't fix anything because fixing things costs money and a man's life is cheaper than a repair bill, apparently. He exhaled slowly. His name was Thomas. He was 41 years old. He had a daughter who was 8. "Daniel," Margaret said softly. "I've spent 6 years fighting for people like him," he said. "People who fall through the cracks. Workers who die or get hurt because the people with power decided they mattered less than a profit margin. Veterans who come home and can't get what they need. Families who have nobody to stand up for them." He looked at his tea. "I travel because it keeps me from sitting still long enough to remember that none of it brought Thomas back." "No," Margaret agreed quietly. "It doesn't. But it matters," he said. "It has to matter." "It does," she said. She believed it. He could hear that she believed it, and that simple, genuine, uncomplicated belief was something Daniel Hayes hadn't received in such a long time that he didn't quite know what to do with it. He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to dump all that on you." "Don't apologize," she said. "Ever apologize for telling the truth to someone who's listening." She stood up. She picked up his glass, which was empty. "More sweet tea?" He laughed. A real laugh. Short and rough and surprised, like something that had been stuck and finally worked loose. "More sweet tea," he said. She went to get it. And behind the counter, pouring sweet tea into a tall glass, Margaret Whitmore felt something she hadn't let herself feel in a while. Earned. That her work, this unglamorous, underpaid, undervalued work, was exactly what it was supposed to be. And not just food, not just service, a lifeline, thin and simple and made of nothing more than attention and kindness. Earned. But a lifeline nonetheless. She didn't know, in that moment, what was coming. Earned. She didn't know what the next weeks would reveal about the tired man at table 7. Earned. She didn't know what Victoria was already planning. Earned. She didn't know that her grandson Noah's medical bills had reached the number that woke her up at 3 in the morning and made her stare at the ceiling, calculating and recalculating math that never came out right. Earned. She didn't know that the intersection of all of those things, the man at the table, earned, the CEO with her decision already made, earned, the bills that never stopped growing, earned, the work that felt like the most important thing she'd ever done was about to change the rest of her life. Earned. She just poured the sweet tea, walked back to table 7, earned, set it down in front of a man the whole room had been afraid of, earned, and said, "There you go. Thank you, Margaret," he said. Earned. 2 words, the most ordinary 2 words in the world. Earned. But in that restaurant on that night, they carried everything. Earned. The next morning, Margaret woke up at 5:15 the way she always did, not because of an alarm. She hadn't used an alarm clock in 20 years. Her body had simply decided, somewhere around age 42, earned, that 5:15 was when the day began, earned, and it had never changed its mind since. She made coffee. She sat at her kitchen table. She looked at the stack of papers on the corner of the counter that she'd been looking at every morning for 4 months. Earned. Noah's medical bills. Her grandson was 11 years old. Earned. He had been 11 years old when the car accident happened. Not his fault. Not anyone in the family's fault. Just one of those moments where the universe decides to remind you that it doesn't negotiate. Earned. A driver ran a red light on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Earned. Noah had been in the back seat of his mother's car. Earned. The impact was on his side. The surgeries went well, the doctors said. Earned. As well as these things go. But what the doctors didn't say, what nobody told you ahead of time, was that went well was only the beginning of a very long road. Earned. Physical therapy, specialist visits. A particular kind of equipment his spine needed for the next 18 months. Earned. Small things and big things and medium things that all had price tags attached to them that didn't care whether you could afford them or not. Margaret's daughter Claire worked 2 jobs already. Earned. She was doing everything she could, but everything she could wasn't enough. Earned. And so Margaret worked the extra shifts. She picked up Sundays, which she had always kept free. Earned. She told herself it was fine. She told herself people had faced harder things. Earned. She told herself every morning at 5:15, while she looked at those papers, that she was grateful. Grateful Noah was alive. Grateful she had a job. Grateful for every single shift, and she meant it. Earned. Every word of it. But gratitude doesn't pay a neurology bill. Earned. She drank her coffee. She got dressed. She drove to Silver Oak. Earned. She had no idea that when she walked through that door, everything was already in motion. Earned. Kevin met her at the counter. He had that look again. Earned. The collar-straightening look. Except this morning it was worse. Earned. His eyes didn't quite meet hers when he said good morning. Earned. He handed her the section assignments for the day. Earned. He started to say something, then didn't. "Kevin," she said. Earned. "What is it?" He exhaled slowly. "Victoria called me this morning," he said. Earned. "Early, like 6:30 early." Margaret waited. "She wants documentation," he said. Earned. "Of the last 3 weeks. She asked me to pull she wants a record of every time you served that customer." Earned. "The biker. She wants a written account of the conversation she had with you in the break room and whether I was present and what was said." Earned. Margaret set her apron on the counter. "She's building a case," she said. Earned. Kevin looked genuinely pained. He was 34 years old, and he had worked his way up to manager over 5 years, and he was not a bad person. Earned. He was just a person who had a mortgage and a wife and a baby on the way, and a boss who had made very clear in very unambiguous terms what happened to people who didn't fall into line. Earned. "Margaret," he said, "I'm sorry. I want you to know that I don't think this is right. But," she said, "but I also can't. I have to give her what she asks for. Earned. I don't have a choice." She looked at him, and she felt for him, genuinely, because she understood the position he was in. Earned. She had been in positions like that herself, years ago when she had less gray in her hair and more to lose. And the courage required to say no to someone powerful felt like an impossible weight. And you do what you have to do, Kevin, she said. I'm not angry with you. And he looked at her like that made it worse. Maybe it did. And she's coming in Thursday, he said quietly. Around dinner service. And Thursday, Daniel's night. All right, Margaret said. And thank you for telling me. She put on her apron and went to work. And she moved through that morning with the particular efficiency of someone who has decided that the only thing they can control right now is doing their job exactly right. Every table turned cleanly, every order correct, every refill before the glass was empty. And she was so locked in that Donna, the other senior waitress who worked the morning shift, pulled her aside around 9:30 and said, okay, what's wrong? You're working like someone's timing you. I'm fine, Margaret said. You're not fine, Donna said. You're doing that thing where you go very fast and very quiet and you don't look at anyone too long. You've been doing that thing for 27 years and I've known you for 22 of them. So don't tell me you're fine. Margaret almost laughed. Victoria's building a case to let me go, she said. Donna went very still. Because of the biker, she said. Because I served him when she told me not to. Donna was quiet for a moment. Then, what are you going to do? Keep serving him, Margaret said. Donna looked at her for a long time. Okay, she said finally. Okay, she picked up her order pad. I'll cover table 9 for you if you need a minute Thursday. Thank you, Donna. Don't thank me. Just don't get fired before I retire. I need someone at this counter who remembers how things are supposed to work. She walked away. Margaret stood there for a moment with a coffee pot in her hand and a warmth in her chest that she hadn't expected. She went back to work. The lunch rush came and went. The afternoon slowed the way Tuesday afternoons always do. Around 3 o'clock in the gap between lunch and dinner, she sat at the counter and ate a bowl of soup and thought about Noah. She had visited him on Sunday. He had been sitting up in bed. He was home now, finally home, but the equipment was there, and the therapy schedule was there, and the bills were there, and he had been doing a puzzle. One of those 1,000-piece ones with an image of the American Southwest that his grandfather had given him before he passed. He'd had his headphones on, and he hadn't heard her come in, and she'd stood in the doorway for a moment just watching him. He was so focused, so careful with each piece, so completely himself. She had promised herself in that doorway that she would do whatever needed to be done, whatever it cost her, whatever she had to give up or keep going through. He was going to be okay. She would make sure of it. Even if it meant working every Sunday for the rest of her working life. Even if it meant losing this job and finding another one. She had faced hard things before. She could face this one. She finished her soup. She stood up. She checked the time. 4 hours until Thursday. No, 3 days. 3 days until Thursday. She smiled at herself. The counting had already started. That was how you knew something mattered. When you started counting the days. Thursday arrived the way all significant days arrive, looking exactly like an ordinary one. Margaret came in at 4. The dinner prep was already underway. She tied her apron. She checked her sections. She made sure table 7, Daniel's table. She had stopped pretending it wasn't. Daniel's table was clean and set and ready. By 5 o'clock, the restaurant was filling up. By 6, it was running at full capacity, the way it always did on Thursdays in spring, when something about the turn in the weather made people want to eat out and sit across from each other and just be somewhere together. Margaret was at table 12 when the door opened at 6:47. She didn't need to look up to know. She heard the particular shift in the room's energy. The slight tightening, the way a conversation somewhere nearby tapered off. She finished writing down the order at table 12, thanked the couple there, and turned. Daniel was at the door. He looked the same as he always did. Vest, boots, the gray beard, the tired eyes that had been getting, over the past 3 weeks, very slightly, almost imperceptibly less tired. He spotted the table. He started walking toward it. Margaret started moving too, and then she saw Victoria. She was at the back, near the register. She had arrived 30 minutes ago and positioned herself so that she could see the entire room. She was watching Daniel walk to the table with an expression Margaret had seen on other people in other contexts, the look of someone who is not deciding whether to act because they have already decided, but is simply waiting for the right moment. Margaret reached the table first. Sweet tea? She asked, before Daniel had even properly sat down. Please, he said. He looked at her. Something in her face had changed, she knew it, because she was never good at hiding things from people who were paying attention, and he was paying attention. You all right? Busy night, she said. The pot roast is good. I'll be right back. She went to get the tea. At the counter, Victoria materialized beside her. He's here, she said. He is, Margaret agreed. I want you to tell him we're fully booked, Victoria said. Tell him there are no available tables. Margaret looked at the dining room. 3 empty tables visible from where they were standing. There are available tables, she said. Margaret, I'm not going to lie to him. You are going to do what I am telling you to do. Then I would need you to tell me to do it directly, in front of witnesses, Margaret said. Quietly, without heat. I would need that in writing. Victoria's expression shifted. She hadn't expected that. Excuse me? If you're asking me to turn away a paying customer who has broken no rules and caused no trouble, I need that instruction documented. Because that's a decision that has legal implications, Victoria. And I'm not going to be the person who carries it alone. The word legal landed exactly the way Margaret intended it to. Victoria was a businesswoman. She understood the language of liability. She understood what it meant when a longtime employee started talking about documentation and witnesses. Her jaw tightened. We'll discuss this after service, she said. All right, Margaret said. She took the sweet tea to Daniel. He was sitting very still. He had seen the exchange at the counter. He hadn't heard it, but he had watched it with the careful attention of someone who had spent a lifetime reading rooms. That was about me, he said. It was about a business decision, Margaret said. Margaret, she looked at him. Tell me honestly, he said. Is this putting your job at risk? Not maybe. Not possibly. And actually, is your job at risk because of me? She put the tea on the table. She thought about lying. She was a bad liar. Had been her whole life. Her mother used to say that God had given her the most honest face of any child she'd ever seen, and that it was equal parts gift and inconvenience. Honestly, she said, please. Probably, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he closed his eyes briefly. Opened them. And there was something in them now that she hadn't seen before. Something that had moved from one side of a line to the other. Something that had been considering and had finished considering. I need to tell you something, he said. And I want you to hear all of it before you respond. She sat down. Because when a person said, I need to tell you something in that particular voice, low and deliberate and carrying weight, you sat down. My name is Daniel Hayes, he said, which you know. But what you don't know is that Hayes is also the name on a company called Hayes Transportation and Construction. Which is, it's not a small company. She looked at him. How not small, she said. It operates in 31 states, he said. We have facilities in 4 countries. The revenue last year was he stopped, started again. It's not a small company. Margaret stared at him. He held her gaze steadily. No apology in it. No performance. Just a person telling the truth after a long time of carrying it quietly. You're not, she started. I'm exactly who you've been talking to for 3 weeks, he said. I want to be clear about that. Everything I've told you, Thomas, my wife, the road, and why I travel, all of it is true. Every word. The company is also true, he paused. I travel anonymously, have been for 3 years. I visit businesses. I watch how people treat each other. I watch how management treats employees. I watch how employees treat customers and how customers treat employees. Because I believe I've always believed that you can tell everything about an organization by watching how the people inside it treat someone they have no obvious reason to be kind to. Margaret said nothing. She was processing 3 weeks of dinners, 3 weeks of pot roast and sweet tea and real conversations, 3 weeks of a tired man at a corner table who had reminded her of her father. You were testing us, she said. No, he said immediately. Firmly, not you. Not personally, I want to be very clear. I didn't come in here with a plan that involved you. I came in here because I was passing through and I was hungry and I hadn't eaten a proper meal in 3 days. He met her eyes. What happened when I walked through that door, that was real. Your boss telling you not to serve me was real. And what you did was real. And none of that was staged. None of that was a test. It was just he exhaled. And it was just a Thursday night, and it turned out to matter. The restaurant moved around them. Plates, voices. The sound of a child laughing 2 tables over. Margaret sat very still. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "Because you're going to lose your job," he said. "Over me." "And I'm not going to let that happen without you knowing who I am." She looked at her hands on the table. 27 years of those hands carrying plates and pouring coffee and holding the hands of customers who were crying and writing down orders and doing the 10,000 small acts that make up a working life. "Daniel," she said. "Does it change anything?" she asked. "In this conversation?" He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean you being who you are. Does it change the way we've been talking? Does it change anything you've said to me or anything I've said to you?" He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "For me, no." "For me either," she said. Something settled between them. The kind of thing that doesn't have a name, but that both people feel at the same time. "Okay," she said. She stood up. She smoothed her apron. "Then the pot roast is still good tonight, and you should still get the peach pie if there's any left, and I'm going to go do my job." He looked up at her. "Margaret." "I know," she said. "I know what you're going to say, and I appreciate it. But I need to finish this shift first. We can figure out the rest after." She went back to work. She carried plates and refilled drinks and smiled at families and took orders and did everything that she had done every shift for 27 years with the same complete attention. But in the back of her mind, behind all of it, something was shifting, rearranging, trying to find a shape that made sense. A billionaire, sitting at table 7 for 3 weeks, ordering pot roast. She almost laughed at the sheer improbability of it. Then she almost cried, because it didn't change anything. That was the part that kept landing over and over again. It didn't change a single thing she had done or felt or decided. She hadn't served him because she knew who he was. She had served him because he was a human being who was hungry and tired and had been looked at like a problem instead of a person. And that was the only reason that mattered. At 8:15, Victoria came out of the back. She walked to Daniel's table. Margaret was at the counter and she watched. Victoria said something to Daniel, short, controlled. Her body language, all authority and straight spine. Daniel looked up at her. He said something back. Victoria's posture shifted, just slightly. The kind of shift that only someone watching very carefully would catch. She said something else. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and placed something on the table. A card. He slid it across to her. Victoria looked at it. Her face went through several changes in about 4 seconds. The kind of changes that happen when your brain is receiving information that is reorganizing a very large number of previously held assumptions all at once. She picked up the card. She looked at Daniel. She looked at the card again. She said something. Daniel nodded. She walked away from the table, not toward Margaret, not toward Kevin, but toward the exit, at a pace that was almost but not quite the pace of someone who was trying not to run. Margaret walked to Daniel's table. "What just happened?" she asked. He folded his hands on the table. "She asked me to leave," he said. And I introduced myself properly," he said. "The card." The card, he confirmed. Margaret looked toward the door, which had just closed behind Victoria. "She's not coming back tonight," Daniel said. "She went to make phone calls." That's what people do when the ground shifts under them. They go make phone calls. Margaret sat down again. "Daniel," she said, "what happens now?" He looked at her directly. "That depends on you," he said partly. He paused. "I've been watching this location for 2 weeks before I walked in the door. I want to be fully honest with you. I had concerns about the management here, about the way employees were being treated, about the culture Victoria was building. I had reports from 3 different employees who had contacted my stop. The company has a thing, a way for people to report problems. I had 3 separate reports from employees here. That's why this location was on my list." Margaret thought about the employees. Young staff who had looked nervous every time Victoria walked in. Kevin and his perpetual collar straightening, the turnover that had gotten worse every year for the past 3. Earned. What are you going to do? She asked. There's going to be an investigation, he said. And there's going to be a review of how this location is managed and how decisions are made and what kind of place this actually is for the people who work here. Victoria will fight it, Margaret said. Probably. And she has lawyers. So do I, he said. Simply, without arrogance. And just stating a fact. Margaret looked at the table. And at her hands, at the grain of the wood that she'd memorized over 27 years of standing beside it. And me? She asked. He looked at her steadily. You're going to be fine, he said. And I can promise you that much. Whatever happens next, you are going to be fine. And she wanted to believe him. She believed him. And then something happened that she hadn't expected. And she started to cry. Not big dramatic crying, not the kind that makes a scene. And just the quiet, unstoppable kind that comes after a very long period of holding things through sheer will, and the will finally gets the message that it can stand down. And she pressed her fingers against her eyes. I'm sorry, she said. And I'm sorry. I don't do that. Usually, I know, he said. And it's just she stopped. Started again. It's not even this. It's not just this. It's Noah, my grandson. He was hurt in an accident, and the bills are there a lot. And I've been working the extra shifts, and I told myself it was fine. It would be fine. We'd figure it out. But some mornings I look at those papers on my kitchen counter, and she stopped. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Because you're tired, Daniel said. And you're sitting across from someone you trust. And sometimes that's all it takes. She looked at him. How old? 11, she said. What kind of treatment? She told him. The spine, the specialist, the equipment, the ongoing physical therapy that would be needed for at least 18 more months. Daniel listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look away. He asked two specific questions, the kind of questions that told her he wasn't listening politely. He was listening with the part of his brain that was already thinking 2 steps ahead. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The Hayes Family Foundation funds pediatric medical support, he said. It's one of the first things we set up. After Thomas, after my brother's daughter, my niece, needed help after he died. It matters to us, and we fund it properly. He paused. I'm going to need Noah's information, with your permission. And Claire's, that's your daughter? That's my daughter, she said. With your permission, he said again. I'll make a call tomorrow morning. Margaret opened her mouth. Nothing came out. You said yes already, he said. Gently, to the question you were trying to ask. Yes, it's real. Yes, it'll cover what he needs. Yes, no strings. She pressed her hand over her mouth. She thought about 5:15 in the morning. The coffee, the stack of papers on the corner of the counter, the math that never came out right, the Sunday shifts, the counting, all of it, all the weight of all of it. Daniel, I know, he said. I didn't when I sat you down, I wasn't. I know exactly why you sat me down, he said. And it had nothing to do with this. That's the only reason I'm sitting here right now. She understood what he meant. If she had been kind to him because of who he was, because of money, because of power, because of what it might get her, then none of it would mean anything. It would just be another transaction dressed up as kindness. But she had been kind to him because of who he was in a different way. Because of the tired eyes, because of the hands that had seen hard work, because of a father she had lost 30 years ago who had deserved better from every room he ever walked into. That was the only reason. And Daniel Hayes, who had spent 3 years walking into rooms anonymously and watching how people treated each other, knew the difference between those two things better than almost anyone alive. Okay, she said. She pulled herself back together. Piece by piece, the way she always had. Okay, he said. She stood up, she smoothed her apron. The pie is gone, she said. I'm sorry. It went fast tonight. That's all right, he said. I can get you a slice of chocolate cake. It's not the same, but it's good. Chocolate cake, he said. Coming up. She walked back to the counter. Donna was there. She had been watching the table. She looked at Margaret with the expression of someone who has approximately 47 questions, and the wisdom to know this is not the time for any of them. You need anything? Donna asked. Chocolate cake, Margaret said. Table 7. Donna cut the slice. Margaret carried it out. And the rest of the dinner service passed. Customers came. Customers went. Bills were paid. Tables were cleared. And the normal rhythm of a Thursday night at Silver Oak, moving forward the way it always did. But in the back of the restaurant, in the corner of the building, Kevin had been on his phone for the last 40 minutes, expression that said the phone calls coming in were not ordinary ones. And outside in the parking lot, Victoria Langford sat in her car and made the same call 3 times to 3 different people. And at table 7, Daniel Hayes ate his chocolate cake slowly. He was in no hurry. For the first time in 2 years, he was exactly where he wanted to be. And he left the same way he always did. He stopped at the counter. And he caught Margaret's eye. "Good night, Margaret." "Good night, Daniel." And he paused. "I meant what I said about everything." "And I know you did," she said. "I'll be back Thursday," he said. And she almost said, "Will you?" But she stopped herself. And because she believed him. And because she was learning slowly, at 62 years old, to let good things be true without immediately questioning them. "I'll have the pot roast ready," she said. He nodded. He walked out, the door closed behind him. And Margaret Whitmore stood at the counter of a restaurant she had given 27 years of her life to, in a town that was about to learn that the way you treat a person on an ordinary Thursday night can undo or remake everything you've built. She didn't know yet exactly how it would go. She didn't know what the investigation would find, or how Victoria would respond, or what the next weeks would demand of her. But she knew something had shifted tonight in a way that didn't shift back. She knew Noah was going to be okay. She knew that. And she held on to it the way you hold on to the one true thing when everything else is still unsettled. Like a handhold on a long climb. Like the first breath after being underwater. Like sweet tea on a Thursday evening for a man who needed someone to see him. It was enough. For tonight, it was more than enough. Kevin called Margaret at 7:15 the next morning. She was still at the kitchen table with her coffee. Still in her robe, and when she saw his name on the screen, she felt her stomach drop the way it does when you've been expecting a call and dreading it in equal measure. "Kevin," she said. "Margaret." His voice was tight, the voice of someone who hadn't slept. "I need to tell you something before you come in today. Victoria called me at midnight, and then again at 6. And what did she say?" He stopped, started again. "She knows who he is, Daniel." She looked up the card he gave her. And "Margaret, do you know who that man is? Do you actually know?" "He told me last night," she said. Silence on the line. "He told you," Kevin repeated slowly. "He told me." Another silence, longer. "And you're still." Kevin seemed to be trying to locate the sentence he was looking for. "You knew, and you treated him exactly the same." "He's the same person," she said. The card didn't change who he is. Kevin made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something much more complicated than a laugh. "Margaret, Victoria she is not handling this well." She called the board. She called the company lawyers. She's trying to frame this as she's saying that he was conducting some kind of illegal surveillance of her business. That he misrepresented himself. "He walked in and ordered dinner," Margaret said. He didn't misrepresent anything. He just didn't announce himself. "That's not illegal, Kevin. That's just a man eating pot roast." "And I know that," Kevin said. "I know that. But she's scared and scared people. Do stupid things," Margaret finished. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, they do." He paused. She also said, "And I'm telling you this because you deserve to know," she said. "She wants you out." She's calling it insubordination. She's saying you violated direct management orders on multiple occasions and that he stopped again. Like the words were difficult to carry. She's saying you colluded with a competitor who was conducting corporate espionage. The word colluded sat in the air between them. Margaret set her coffee cup down. "Corporate espionage," she said. "I know. Kevin, I'm a 62-year-old waitress who served a man pot roast. I know, Margaret, I didn't collude with anyone. I brought him sweet tea. I know." His voice had dropped further. The sound of a man who was ashamed of the words coming out of his mouth, even though they weren't his words. "She's going to make it formal today. There's going to be a letter. Termination with cause." Margaret was quiet. Outside her kitchen window, a bird was doing something cheerful and completely indifferent to the situation. All right, she said. All right, Kevin said. That's Margaret. That's all you have to say? Earned. What do you want me to say, Kevin? I don't know. Earned. Something more than all right. She picked her coffee back up. Earned. I've known this was coming since the first night, she said. Since I walked past her and put that menu on his table. Earned. I knew. You don't defy someone like Victoria in front of a full dining room and then act surprised when she decides to make it cost you something. She took a sip. Earned. But I'd do it again. So the all right isn't me being resigned. Earned. It's me being clear. Whatever she puts in that letter doesn't change what was right to do. Earned. And it doesn't change what I did. Kevin was quiet for a long moment. Earned. You're a better person than I am, he said. You've got a baby coming, she said. Earned. You made the right call for the right reasons. Don't be hard on yourself for that. Earned. Margaret, go take care of your family, Kevin. And I'll be fine. She hung up. She sat with the quiet of the kitchen for a minute. Earned. Just a minute. She allowed herself that. Then she got up, got dressed, and drove to Silver Oak. Earned. She wasn't going to wait for a letter delivered to her house. Earned. If she was going out, she was going out behind that counter. Earned. The morning shift was already underway when she arrived. Earned. Donna saw her come through the door, and something moved across her face, relief and worry tangled together. Earned. You heard, Donna said. I heard. Are you working? Margaret said. Earned. She tied her apron. Let's work. They worked. For 3 hours, Margaret Whitmore waited tables at Silver Oak Restaurant with the particular quality of attention she brought to everything she cared about. Earned. She was present with every table. She remembered names. Earned. She refilled the coffees before they went cold. Earned. She remembered that the man in the back corner liked his eggs without salt, and that the young woman near the window was studying for something. She had a textbook and she looked exhausted, and Margaret brought her a slice of toast she hadn't. Earned. Ordered and said, you look like you need fuel. And the young woman looked up, startled, and then said thank you in the voice of someone who genuinely meant it. And that was the job. That had always been the job. At 10:43, the letter arrived, not delivered by Kevin. Victoria had sent a representative. Earned. A man in a business suit who had no history with this restaurant and no connection to any of the people in it, which Margaret suspected was exactly why Victoria had chosen him. Earned. Clean hands, no awkwardness. Just an envelope placed on the counter and a name called. Earned. Margaret Whitmore. Everyone in the restaurant heard it. Earned. The breakfast crowd. Earned. The mid-morning regulars. Earned. Donna behind the counter. Earned. The 2 younger servers near the kitchen door. Earned. Everyone went still again. That specific Silver Oak stillness. Earned. Margaret walked to the counter. She took the envelope. Earned. She opened it right there, in front of everyone, because she wasn't going to walk into a back room and open it privately like it was something to be ashamed of. And she read it. Termination effective immediately. Insubordination. Earned. Violation of direct management orders. Behavior detrimental to the business. Earned. The language was careful and lawyered. Every word chosen to cover Victoria and expose nothing of the actual reasoning. Earned. Margaret folded the letter, put it in her apron pocket. Earned. She looked at the man in the suit. Thank you, she said. Earned. Because that was the kind of person she was, even now. Earned. He left. Donna was watching her from behind the espresso machine with an expression Margaret recognized as the specific look of someone who is deciding between crying and throwing something. Earned. Don't, Margaret said. I'm not doing anything, Donna said tightly. Earned. You're about to do something. Don't. Donna pressed her lips together. Earned. The young server near the kitchen door, Alicia. Earned. 23 years old. Earned. 6 months into the job, said very quietly. Earned. This isn't right. Earned. No, Margaret agreed. It isn't. Then what are we supposed to do? Earned. Margaret looked around the restaurant. At the tables, she had worked for 27 years. Earned. At the counter, she could navigate blindfolded. At the people eating their breakfasts and their late coffees and their mid-morning escapes from whatever their morning had been so far. Earned. You do your job, she said. You take care of the people in this room. Earned. That's what you do. Because the people in this room came here to be taken care of, and they deserve that no matter what's happening behind the counter. She untied her apron and folded it, set it on the counter. Donna made a sound. Don't, Margaret said again, softer now. 27 years, Donna said. Earned. She couldn't help it. 27 years, Margaret. Earned. I know. That woman, Donna started, is going to have to live with her own decisions, Margaret said. Earned. That's not nothing. That actually matters. The things we do, they don't disappear. Earned. They stay, they follow us. Victoria knows what she did this morning and why she did it, and she'll know it for a long time. Earned. She picked up her bag from under the counter. She was going to walk out with her head level and her back straight and her eyes clear. Earned. Because that was the only way to walk out of something you had given 27 years to and still believed in, even when the person running it had forgotten what it was for. She was almost at the door. Margaret, she turned. Alicia was standing there, 23 years old. Earned. 6 months in, her eyes were bright and her chin was up, and she looked like someone who had just decided something. Earned. I'm going to remember this, Alicia said. What you just said. Earned. I'm going to remember it for a long time. Margaret looked at her. Earned. Good, she said. That's all any of us can do. Remember the right things and try to do them. She pushed the door open. Earned. Take care of table 6. They've been waiting for the check. She walked out. The morning air hit her face. She stood in the parking lot for a moment. Earned. 27 years. She let herself feel the weight of it. Earned. The full weight. The way you have to let a wave hit you sometimes, instead of trying to step around it, because the trying around is worse than just letting it come. Earned. She let it come and then she got in her car. Earned. She had been sitting there for 4 minutes. Earned. Not going anywhere yet. Earned. Just breathing. Earned. When her phone rang. Earned. Local area code. Hello, Ms. Whitmore. A woman's voice. Earned. Professional, precise. My name is Sandra Reeves. I'm the executive assistant to Daniel Hayes. Earned. Mr. Hayes asked me to call you this morning. He wanted to make sure you'd heard from us before anything else happened today. Earned. Margaret looked at the restaurant through her windshield. Earned. I've already been let go, she said, a brief pause. Earned. We know, Sandra said. The letter was issued at 10:43. Earned. Mr. Hayes was informed immediately. Another pause. Earned. He'd like to meet with you this afternoon if you're available. Earned. There are several things he wants to discuss with you in person. Earned. He wanted me to tell you, and I'm quoting him directly here, that everything he said to you last night still stands, and that this morning's events have not changed his plans. Earned. They've accelerated them. Margaret absorbed that. Earned. Accelerated. What time, she asked. 2 o'clock, Sandra said. And I'll text you the address. All right, Margaret said. Earned. Ms. Whitmore? Yes? Earned. For what it's worth. Earned. Sandra said. Earned. And her professional precision softened just slightly at the edges. Earned. He told me about what you did. Earned. The first night. I've worked for Daniel Hayes for 11 years. I have never once heard him tell a story about a person the way he told that one. Earned. Margaret didn't know what to say to that. Thank you, she managed. Earned. See you at 2, Sandra said. The address Sandra sent was downtown. Earned. A building Margaret had driven past 100 times without paying it particular attention. Clean lines. A lobby that was understated in the way that very expensive things sometimes are not showing off, just solid. And built to last. She arrived at 1:55. Sandra met her in the lobby. Earned. She was exactly what her voice had suggested, efficient, warm underneath the efficiency, the kind of person who ran a complicated life on behalf of someone else and genuinely didn't mind because they believed in what they were doing. Earned. She brought Margaret up in an elevator and down a hallway and into a conference room where Daniel was already waiting. Earned. He was standing. He was wearing a suit. As he had told her, he would be in a different context. She remembered him saying it, that if she saw him again in a different setting, he might look different. And the suit was quiet, dark, well-made, the kind that doesn't announce itself. And he looked like himself. That was the thing she noticed first and most. Earned. Despite everything, despite the suit and the building, and the people who were already moving purposefully around the edges of the room, Earned. He still looked like the man who had sat at table 7 for 3 Thursdays and ordered pot roast and said thank you and meant it. And Margaret, he said. Daniel, she said. He came around the table and shook her hand. Earned. Both hands, actually, the way people do when a handshake isn't quite enough, but a hug isn't quite right either. Earned. Sit down, he said. Please, she sat. He sat across from her. Earned. Around the edges of the room were 3 other people. Earned. 2 men and a woman, all with the particular posture of professionals waiting to be useful. Earned. I know about the letter, he said. I know the timing and I know the language Victoria used, and I want you to know that we are already responding to it. Earned. Responding how, she asked. Our legal team is filing a formal complaint with the Texas Workforce Commission this afternoon, he said. Earned. Wrongful termination. Retaliation for refusing to engage in discriminatory practices against a customer. Earned. There's a very clear timeline her order to you. Earned. Your refusal. Earned. His repeated visits. Earned. Her building of a case. Earned. And now the termination. Earned. He paused. Earned. It's not a complicated case, Margaret. What she did is textbook. Earned. She'll say it was about insubordination, Margaret said. She has Kevin's documentation. Earned. Kevin's documentation shows that you served a paying customer who broke no rules. Earned. Caused no incidents. Earned. And spent money in that restaurant on every visit. Earned. Daniel said. Earned. That's what the documentation shows. Her own records work against her. Earned. Margaret looked at him. And you? She asked. What does this do to you? If this becomes a legal case, you're the anonymity, the way you travel. Earned. That's over, he said simply. The moment I handed Victoria that card, it was over. Earned. I knew that. He met her eyes. I'm not anonymous anymore. Earned. And I decided that was a fair trade. She held his gaze. Earned. For what? She asked. For doing the right thing, he said. Earned. Same reason you did it. The room was quiet for a moment. Earned. Then one of the men at the edge of the room, younger, with the look of someone who handles legal matters for a living, leaned forward and said, Earned. Whitmore, with your permission, I'd like to walk you through where we are and what the next steps look like from a legal standpoint. Earned. Margaret looked at him, please. His name was Robert Chen. Earned. He had been with Hayes Legal for 6 years. He slayed out the situation with the clean clarity of someone who was very good at his job, not simplifying in a way that was condescending, but translating in a way that was respectful. Earned. He told her what the filing would say. He told her what Victoria's likely response would be. Earned. He told her the timeline. He told her plainly and without overselling it what he believed the outcome would be. Earned. When he finished, Margaret said, What do you need from me? Earned. Your account, he said, written. In your words, every interaction. Earned. Every instruction Victoria gave you. Every conversation, every time she made her position clear. Earned. The more specific, the better. I remember all of it, Margaret said. Earned. I know you do, Daniel said. He had been watching her during the whole of Robert's explanation with the careful attention she recognized from table 7. Earned. That's one of the things I know about you by now. Earned. She looked at him. Daniel, she said, there's something I need to ask you. Earned. Ask. The investigation, she said. The one you mentioned last night. Earned. Into the management at Silver Oak. The employee complaints that brought you there in the first place. Earned. Those employees, the ones who filed the reports, are they going to be protected through this? Earned. Something moved across Daniel's face. Respect, she thought. The kind that you can't manufacture. Yes, he said. Earned. Absolutely. That's already in motion. The 3 employees who filed reports have been contacted this morning by HR. Earned. They're being offered reassignment to other locations under different management. Earned. Full pay. Earned. No gap in employment. Earned while the investigation runs. Earned. And the rest of the staff, Margaret said. The ones who didn't file reports, but who were living in that environment every day. Earned. Same offer, he said, every employee at that location. Earned. Kevin too, Daniel said. Though he may not take it, earned, he may feel like he has to stay through it. But the offer stands. Earned. Margaret was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about Alicia. Earned. 23 years old with her chin up and her eyes bright, saying, I'm going to remember this. Earned. One more thing, she said. Whatever you need, Daniel said. Earned. Alicia, she said, the young server. 6 months in. Earned. She spoke up this morning when nobody else did. She said publicly, in front of everyone, that what happened wasn't right. Earned. She's going to have a target on her now with Victoria. Earned. Not anymore, Daniel said. I'll make sure of that personally. Earned. Margaret nodded. She looked down at the table. She was trying to sort through the enormity of the last 18 hours and locate the center of it, the part that made sense as a through line. Earned. That explained how a Thursday night in a roadside diner had led to this room, this table, these conversations. Earned. But she kept coming back to the same thing, the menu. Earned. The menu she had picked up and carried across the room when she didn't have to. Earned. When doing nothing would have been so much easier. Earned. When the path of least resistance had been so clearly marked and so heavily pressured that most people she didn't blame People she understood would have taken it without a second thought. And she had picked up the menu. That was the whole story. And everything else was just what happened after. Margaret, Daniel said, and his voice had shifted. The professional clarity of the conversation so far was still there, but underneath it, something older and more personal had surfaced. There's one more thing I want to discuss with you. And I want to be clear up front that this is completely your choice. There's no obligation, and nothing about the legal situation or Noah's situation is contingent on what you decide. She looked at him. All right, she said. He took a breath. I've been building something, he said, for the last 2 years. Since my wife passed and I started traveling and I started seeing more clearly what the problem was in the places I was looking at. The problem isn't usually money. It isn't usually strategy or logistics or the things that business schools teach you to fix. The problem is almost always people, how people are treated, how people learn to treat each other. Whether the person at the top of an organization actually believes that the people at the bottom of it are worth something. He paused. I've been trying to build a real role with real authority that addresses that problem directly. Someone who sits inside the company and keeps asking the question, are we treating people right? Are we remembering what this is all for? He looked at her steadily. I haven't been able to find the right person for it. I've interviewed a lot of people. Good people. Smart people. People with degrees and frameworks and very organized presentations. He stopped. None of them knew how to do what you did on a Thursday night with nothing but a menu and 27 years of paying attention. The room was very quiet. Margaret's heart was doing something she hadn't expected. Not excitement exactly. Something more complex than that. The feeling of something that you didn't know you'd been waiting for arriving so quietly that you almost the moment it got there. What's the role, she asked. Director of Employee and Customer Care, he said. For the Hayes Group of companies, all 31 states. You'd be responsible for building the culture standards, training programs, feedback systems, the way we hire and the way we treat the people we hire and the way those people treat the people who walk through our doors. He paused. You'd be the person asking the question nobody wants to ask. Is this right? Are we seeing people clearly? Are we making decisions based on who someone is or on what we've assumed about them before they open their mouth? Margaret was quiet. She was quiet for a long time. Robert Chen, to his credit, did not fill the silence with anything. Sandra near the door was very still. Daniel waited. I'm 62, Margaret said. I know. I've never run anything larger than a lunch shift, she said. And I know that too. I don't have a degree in business or management and I know, Daniel said. I also know that the person who wrote the most comprehensive, compassionate, and practically useful customer culture handbook I've ever read was a 60-year-old school cafeteria manager in Oklahoma who had never taken a business class in her life. Credentials tell you what someone studied. They don't tell you what someone knows. He leaned forward slightly. You know how people work, Margaret. You know how people feel when they're seen and when they're not. You know the difference between a policy and a principle. And you know that the moment a place starts deciding who deserves dignity and who doesn't, it has lost the only thing that actually made it worth going to. He paused. That knowledge is worth more to me than an MBA. She looked at her hands. 62 years of hands. Can I think about it? She asked. Take all the time you need, he said. She looked up. Daniel, Noah, she said, the foundation call. That's happening regardless of this? His expression was direct and clear and allowed no ambiguity. I made that call at 7 this morning, he said. It's done. The paperwork is being processed. It has nothing to do with this conversation, and it will never have anything to do with this conversation. I want you to know that as clearly as I can possibly say it. She looked at him, and she believed him, which was the thing she kept coming back to, the thing she kept checking and finding solid. She believed him. Not because he was powerful or because she needed to, or because the alternative was too painful, but because of who he had been at table 7, with no reason to be anything other than exactly himself, and he had been this same person, the one who said please and meant thank you and carried a grief for his brother and his wife, like a man who understood that some weights are supposed to be heavy, because what they represent was worth everything. And she stood up, she extended her hand. He shook it. Give me a week, she said. And you've got it, he said. She turned to go. At the door, she stopped. And because something had been sitting in the back of her mind since the parking lot of Silver Oak that morning, since she had stood in that morning air and let the wave come. And she turned back. Can I ask you something? He said. First night, she said, when I sat you down, and when I put the menu on the table and told you to sit down, and what were you actually feeling in that moment? Not what you thought about it afterward. And in the actual moment, he was still for a beat. And then he answered with the directness of someone who had thought about this question more than once. And relief, he said. That's the honest answer. Not surprise. Not gratitude, yet gratitude came later. In the moment, it was just relief. And like something I'd been bracing against for a very long time had suddenly stopped pushing. She held that. That's what it's supposed to feel like, she said quietly. And when someone does their job right, it shouldn't feel like a big thing. And it should feel like relief. Like the way things were always supposed to work. And he looked at her. Yeah, exactly that. And she nodded. She walked out, down the elevator, through the lobby, and back into the afternoon that was the same afternoon it had been when she walked in, except that nothing was the same at all. And she sat in her car, and she thought about the letter in her apron pocket, which she had carried out of Silver Oak and still had, and folded in thirds, and termination effective immediately, and in lawyered language that was supposed to make her feel small. And she took it out, she looked at it, then she folded it back up and put it in her glove compartment. And not because it didn't matter, it mattered. It was real and it was wrong and it was going to be addressed. But it wasn't the last word. She had known that since 7:43 on the Thursday night when she picked up a menu and carried it across a silent room to a man the whole restaurant had decided not to see. And she drove to Claire's house. Noah was in the living room, puzzles spread across the coffee table. Southwest, 1,000 pieces. He'd made significant progress since Sunday. And he looked up when she came in. Grammy, hi baby, she said. And you're not working today? I had the afternoon off, she said. And he looked at her with the particular perception of 11-year-olds who are old enough to notice when adults aren't telling the whole truth, but young enough not to always press it. And are you okay, he asked. She looked at him, her grandson, and 11 years old with his puzzle and his headphones around his neck and his spine that was healing, slowly and steadily, the way bodies do when they are young and stubborn and full of life they haven't used yet. I'm okay, she said, and she meant it. I'm really okay. And she sat down beside him on the floor. Show me where you are, she said, and with the puzzle. He showed her. And for an hour, Margaret Whitmore sat on the floor of her daughter's living room and put together pieces of the American Southwest with her grandson, and outside the window the afternoon went about its business, and somewhere across town, Victoria Langford was making phone calls that were coming too late, and somewhere Daniel Hayes was reading a document that his legal team had prepared, and somewhere the story of a Thursday night in a roadside diner was becoming something larger than either of them had walked into it expecting. But in that living room, there was just the puzzle, and Noah, and the particular, irreplaceable piece of a grandmother who had done the right thing and knew it, and was letting that knowledge be enough for this one quiet hour, before everything that came next began to arrive. The week Margaret spent thinking felt nothing like a week. It felt like a held breath, like that particular suspension of time that happens when you are standing between what was and what might be, and the ground under your feet is still finding its shape. She filled the days the way she always had when she needed to think clearly by staying useful. She helped Claire with Noah's therapy appointments. She cooked. She cleaned out a closet she'd been meaning to deal with for 2 years. She called her sister in Georgia and talked for an hour about nothing important, which was exactly what she needed. But underneath all of it, she was working through the question Daniel had placed in front of her. Not the job offer itself, that part had become clearer every day since she'd left his office. It was something else. Something she needed to resolve in herself before she could say yes with the full weight of her conviction behind it. She needed to understand why, not why Daniel was offering it. She understood that. She had believed him when he explained it, and she believed him still. What she needed to understand was her own why. The reason that a 62-year-old woman who had never run anything larger than a lunch shift would be the right person to say yes to something this large. On the fourth day, she drove back to Silver Oak, not to go inside, just to sit in the parking lot for a few minutes, just to look at the building. It was a Wednesday afternoon. The lunch rush was over. She could see through the window that the dining room was mostly empty. A couple near the back, a man alone at the counter with coffee. Table 7 was empty. She looked at it through the glass. 27 years she had walked past that table every shift, hundreds of times, thousands, and it had been just a table. 4 legs and a surface and 2 chairs, until one Thursday night when a man sat down in it and she put a menu in front of him and 5 seconds changed everything. She thought about what Daniel had asked her. Are we seeing people clearly? Are we making decisions based on who someone is or on what we've assumed about them before they open their mouth? She thought about her father, his big hands, the road on his face at the end of a long day, the way people's eyes moved past him before he had a chance to say a word. She thought about Thomas, Daniel's brother, 41 years old, a Marine who came home and went to work and died because the people with power over his safety had decided the cost of his life was acceptable. She thought about the employees at Silver Oak, Kevin and Alicia and Donna, and the others living in the culture that had been quietly teaching them day after day that some people mattered less than others, that the person who walked through the door should be evaluated before they were welcomed. That was the damage. That was what she understood, sitting in that parking lot on a Wednesday afternoon, more clearly than she could have articulated it to anyone. The damage wasn't just in the big decisions, the firings, the policies, the formal cruelties. The damage was in the 1,000 small daily moments where a person learned or unlearned how to see other people. That was what she knew how to address. Not with a framework or a policy manual or a training module, though those things would be part of it. But with the thing underneath all of those, the thing that started with a menu and a human being who needed to sit down. She started the car, she drove home, she called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. Margaret, I'll take the job, she said. A beat of silence, he said. I've been sure for 4 days, she said. I just needed to understand why I was sure and because I've been doing this job for 27 years, she said. Just in a much smaller room. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, can you start Monday? I can start Monday, she said. The call lasted 3 more minutes. Logistics. Sandra would be in touch with paperwork. There was an office, an actual office, which Margaret still could not fully picture herself in the downtown building. Robert Chen had updates on the legal filing that she should hear soon. She hung up. She sat in her kitchen with her hands in her lap, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not relief, not excitement, something quieter than both of those. Ready. She felt ready. What she didn't know what was happening simultaneously in a glass office across town was that Victoria Langford was not sitting still. Victoria had spent the same 4 days. Margaret was filling with quiet, purposeful activity doing the opposite. She had been on the phone constantly. She had brought in her personal attorney, a man named Gerald Hatch, who had spent 30 years making inconvenient things disappear through the application of enough paperwork and enough pressure. She had met with the Silver Oak Board of Directors, the 3 people whose names were on the ownership documents alongside hers, and she had told them a version of events that centered on corporate espionage, on a staged infiltration of her business, on a calculated attempt to manufacture cause to remove her from management of a location she had built. It was a story that required you to ignore a great deal of inconvenient evidence. But Victoria had learned, over a career built on strategic navigation, that the first story told in a room often has an advantage over the truth. Not because it's more convincing, but because people who hear it first have to do work to unhear it when the truth arrives. They have to revise. They have to admit they were wrong. And most people, given a choice between being right and being comfortable, choose comfortable. She was counting on that. What she hadn't counted on was Kevin. Kevin Martinez, 34 years old, earned mortgage, earned pregnant wife, earned 5 years working his way up to manager, earned the man who had spent the last 3 weeks wearing his collar smooth with straightening up and drove to Robert Chen's office on Thursday morning without telling anyone he was going. And he sat down across from Robert and he placed a manila folder on the table and he said, "I kept copies." And Robert looked at the folder. "Of what?" he asked. "Everything," Kevin said. "And every email Victoria sent me about Margaret, every instruction. Earned every time she told me to document something or watch something or build a record against her. Earned I kept it all because I have a baby coming and I needed to make sure that if this ever went sideways, I wasn't the one left holding something I didn't choose to carry alone." And he pushed the folder across the table. "Every single instruction is time-stamped," he said. And the email telling me not to serve the biker the first night, the one she sent me 15 minutes before she walked into the restaurant and said it out loud. And the email the following Monday telling me to begin building a case against Margaret. And the email asking me to document her customer interactions, specifically to establish a pattern. And all of it. Robert opened the folder. He read in silence for 40 seconds. He looked up. "Kevin," he said carefully, "you understand what this means?" And "I understand," Kevin said. "I should have come forward sooner." And "I know that. I'm not pretending I handled this well. And I let it go on. I did the documenting she asked me to do because I was scared and I had things to lose, and I am not proud of that." He held Robert's gaze. And "But I'm not letting her pin this on Margaret, and I'm not letting her rewrite the story of what actually happened." And Robert looked at the folder. Then he reached across his desk and picked up his phone. "And I need to call Daniel," he said. "I figured," Kevin said. And the call lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, Robert looked at Kevin with the particular expression of a lawyer who has just watched a case change shape in real time. And "Daniel wants to know if you're willing to provide a formal statement," he said. And "That's why I'm here," Kevin said. The statement took 2 hours to complete. Kevin remembered everything. Dates, times, exact wording of instructions. And he was precise in the way that people are precise when they have been carrying something uncomfortable for a long time and are finally allowed to set it down properly in the right place where it belongs. When he finished, Robert walked him out. At the door, Kevin stopped. "And is Margaret okay?" he asked. "She's good," Robert said. "And I heard that she took a position with Hayes." "And you heard right?" Kevin nodded slowly. He looked at the floor for a moment. "And she said to me once that she wasn't angry. When I told her about the letter coming, and she said she wasn't angry with me." He shook his head. "And I don't know how you're not angry with someone who didn't protect you when they should have." Robert looked at him. "Maybe," Robert said. "She understood that some people need more time than others to find their courage. And that what matters is whether they find it." Kevin absorbed that. And "Tell her I'm sorry," he said, "if you talk to her. Tell her I'm sorry it took me this long." "Tell her yourself," Robert said. "And you'll have the chance." Kevin left. And he drove back to Silver Oak, and he stood behind the counter of the restaurant he managed, and he did his job with the particular quality of attentions of someone who had finally, at whatever cost, done the right thing. And the investigation moved fast after that. Corporate investigations, when they are conducted by people with genuine authority and real resources, do not lumber. And they move with a precision that is almost surgical. And within 72 hours of Kevin's statement, 3 other current Silver Oak employees had provided their own accounts. And 2 former employees who had left in the past year, both of whom had cited the management environment as their reason, were contacted and agreed to speak. And the picture that emerged was not complicated. Victoria Langford had built a culture at Silver Oak that ran on a single operating principle: control. And control of appearances, control of narrative, control of which customers were welcome and which employees stayed in line. And she had made decisions based not on what was right or what was legal or what was good for the people inside that building, but on what maintained her picture of what the restaurant was supposed to look like and who was supposed to be in it. And the biker in the Hells Angels vest had been, for her, a threat to the picture. And Margaret's refusal to remove him had been, for her, a threat to control. And she had responded the only way she knew how, by eliminating the thing that challenged her, She had not expected that the things she was eliminating would turn out to be connected to a man who owned the building she worked in. She had not expected that the things she was eliminating had 27 years of memory behind her and the respect of every person who had ever worked beside her. She had not expected that her own documentation would become the clearest evidence against her. But this was the thing about people who built systems of control. They were thorough. They kept records, they documented, they left a paper trail of every instruction and every pressure applied and every decision made, because they believed that documentation was protection. And it was. It just protected the wrong person. Daniel arrived at Silver Oak on the following Tuesday. He was not wearing his vest this time. He was in the suit. And he came with Robert Chen and two members of his executive team and a board representative named Patricia Huang, who had the demeanor of someone who had seen a great deal in a long career and was not easily impressed or easily shocked. Victoria was informed they were coming. She was waiting in the manager's office when they arrived. Gerald Hatch, her attorney, was beside her. She was dressed impeccably. Her posture was perfect. She had the expression of someone who has prepared a position and intends to hold it. She looked at Daniel when he walked in, and her expression did something complicated. Because this was the thing that Victoria had been trying to process since the night he handed her his card, the cognitive distance between the man she had dismissed and the man who owned the company. She had spent a week trying to make those two things fit together, and they kept not fitting because she kept refusing to accept the simplest explanation, which was that they were the same person and she had been wrong about him from the first moment she saw him. Mr. Hayes, she said. Victoria. Daniel said. He didn't extend his hand. Not rudely. He sat down. Everyone sat. Daniel folded his hands on the table. I'm going to be direct, he said. Because I think that's what this situation deserves. And I think you're someone who prefers direct, even when the direct thing is hard to hear. Victoria's jaw tightened slightly. Gerald Hatch said, before we begin, I want to establish the legal parameters of this conversation. Gerald, Victoria said. He stopped. She looked at Daniel. Go ahead, she said. Daniel nodded. The investigation is complete, he said. The findings have been reviewed by two independent parties as well as our own legal team. What they show is a consistent pattern of management decisions based on personal bias, applied to both customer interactions and employee treatment. What they show specifically is a documented campaign to build cause for the termination of a 27-year employee who refused to participate in discriminatory behavior toward a customer. He paused. They also show that the termination letter you authorized was a direct act of retaliation. It is not defensible legally, and I think you know, it is not defensible ethically either. Victoria said nothing. Her hands were folded on the table, very still. The board has reviewed the findings, Patricia Huang said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was level, not unkind, but absolutely clear. We've made a decision, Victoria. Effective, immediately, your management authority at Silver Oak is suspended pending a formal review process. At the conclusion of that review, the board will determine whether an ongoing role is appropriate. Gerald Hatch leaned forward. My client has rights in this process, and we will be earned. Gerald. Victoria again. Her voice had changed. Something had gone out of it. The controlled authority, the certainty. Something that had been holding her posture together had shifted. She looked at Daniel. Not at Patricia, not at Robert. At Daniel. And for the first time since he had walked through the door of Silver Oak 3 weeks ago, she was looking at him like a person looking at another person. Not an assessment, not a category, not a symbol. Just one person looking at another across a table. You were there for weeks, she said. Watches, he said. And the whole time she stopped. Her jaw tightened again, but differently now. Not with authority, with something harder to look at. You kept coming back, Heidi said. Because of her, Victoria said. Not an accusation, a recognition. Because of what she showed me, Daniel said. Yes. Victoria was quiet. She asked me once, she said, Margaret, she said, the reason people came here for 27 years wasn't the food. It was that they felt like they mattered here. She looked at the table. I thought that was sentiment. I thought she was being romantic about a job. She paused. And I've been thinking about it all week. Nobody said anything. And was I wrong? She asked. And the question was quieter than everything else she'd said. And it had lost the armor of her professional voice entirely. And about what she meant? Daniel looked at her for a long moment. And about what she meant, no, he said. About everything else, yes. And but that's a question only you can work through. He met her eyes steadily. And power means nothing if you forget how to treat people, Victoria. And I've said that a lot of times in a lot of rooms. I mean it every time. And it applies to me as much as it applies to anyone else. And the day I stop being able to walk into a restaurant alone and be treated like a person, the day the only way I get dignity is because of the card in my pocket is the day I've lost something more important than anything the card represents. And Victoria looked at him. Something moved across her face. And not a full change, not a transformation. Those don't happen in conference rooms in single moments. But something cracked slightly, in the way that ice cracks before it breaks. A line through something that had been solid for a very long time. And I know why I did it, she said, quietly. I'm not going to pretend I didn't know. And I looked at him and I made a decision before he sat down. And then when Margaret challenged that decision, she stopped. And it wasn't about the restaurant. It was about the fact that she saw something in him that I had refused to see. And that felt like an indictment. Nobody filled the silence. And of me, she said. Robert Chen shifted in his seat. Patricia Huang looked at the table. Daniel said nothing because this was the moment that required nothing from him. And this was Victoria's moment, her reckoning, her truth arriving in its own time in the only way truths arrive, when the person it belongs to finally stops fighting it. And I'll cooperate with the review, she said. She looked at Patricia. And fully, whatever the process requires. Patricia nodded. And one more thing, Victoria said. She looked at Daniel. And Margaret, whatever you're doing with her, make sure she gets what she's worth. And because what she's worth is more than any of us gave her credit for. Daniel held her gaze. She already knows that, he said. And the meeting ended 30 minutes later. Gerald Hatch gathered his papers in silence. And Victoria stood, shook hands where hands were offered, and walked out with the particular posture of someone who has put down a heavy thing and is not yet sure how to walk without it. And Daniel stood in the hallway outside the office for a moment. Robert appeared beside him. You all right? Robert asked. And yeah, Daniel said. That wasn't how I expected that to go, Robert said. And the second half of it? No, Daniel agreed. She surprised you. And she did, he said. People do sometimes, in the direction you don't expect. He started walking toward the exit. And that's the thing Margaret's been trying to tell me, I think. And without saying it directly, that people are worth staying for. And even the ones that disappoint you. You stay present, you hold the line, you give them a real chance to see themselves clearly, and sometimes they do. And Robert thought about that, and sometimes they don't, he said. And sometimes they don't, Daniel agreed. But you still have to give them the chance. And they pushed through the exit and back into the afternoon. And Margaret was not in that meeting. She had not been asked to be there, and she had not asked to be. And it was not her meeting. And she had done her part, the written statement, and the account of every interaction, and every instruction, and every conversation, and she had handed it to the people whose job it was to use it properly. And she was at Noah's physical therapy appointment. She sat in the waiting area while Noah worked with his therapist, and she drank bad coffee out of a paper cup and looked at her phone and saw a text from Robert that said simply, "It went well." And more soon. She put her phone away. Noah came out 40 minutes later walking steadily, which was more steadily than he'd been walking 2 months ago, which was more steadily than he'd been walking the month before that. And he walked toward her with his chin up, and his eyes bright, those eyes so much like his mother's, and so much like Claire's, and so much like the family that ran through all of them. And he said, and I walked the whole balance beam today without holding the rail. And Margaret stood up. The whole thing, he confirmed. Pride all over his 11-year-old face. She put her arm around his shoulders. And that's my boy, she said. They walked to the car together. And she drove him home. Claire was there when they arrived, home early from her second job because her manager had given her a few hours. The three of them sat at the kitchen table and Claire made grilled cheese because it was Noah's favorite, and he had walked the balance beam without holding the rail, and that deserved grilled cheese. And they ate together, and the conversation moved the way family conversation moves sideways and doubling back and landing on things that matter in the way they only do when everyone at the table belongs there. After Noah went to do homework, Claire looked at her mother across the table. Mom, she said, the foundation people called me again today. I know, Margaret said. They confirmed the full amount. 18 months of therapy, the specialist visits, the equipment. Claire's voice had changed. The careful control that Margaret recognized in it, the control of a woman who had been holding things together for a long time and had gotten very good at not letting the seams show, had loosened just around the edges. Mom, do you know what this means? Do you understand what this actually means for us? I know what it means, Margaret said. How did this happen? Claire said. How does a man walk into the restaurant where you work and 3 weeks later everything is? She stopped. How? Margaret looked at her daughter, and she thought about all the ways she could answer that question. The versions that would make a good story, the versions that were technically accurate, the versions that explained the logistics, but none of those were the real answer. The real answer was simpler and older and more stubborn than any version of events. I picked up a menu, she said. Claire looked at her. That's it? Claire said. That's it, Margaret said. He needed a place to sit and I gave him one. He needed someone to see him like a person and I did that. Everything else came from that. She looked at her coffee cup. That's how it works, Claire. That's how it has always worked. The world runs on those moments, the small ones. The ones that look like nothing from the outside. Someone in trouble and someone else who decides to pay attention. She looked up. I've been paying attention for 62 years. It was time for it to matter on a larger scale. Claire was quiet. Then she said, I'm proud of you, Mom. Margaret reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. I know, baby, she said. I know. And in the morning on Monday, Margaret Whitmore would drive downtown and take an elevator and sit at a desk in an office with her name on a placard and begin the work of teaching 31 states what she had spent 27 years learning. From a counter and a coffee pot and the 1,000 faces of people who walked through a door needing something as simple and as enormous as the feeling that they mattered. But that was Monday. Tonight there was grilled cheese. And Noah on the balance beam without holding the rail. And Claire's hand across the table. And a story that wasn't finished yet, not even close, but had arrived at the kind of moment where you could breathe. Where you could look back and look forward at the same time and know, with the deep bone certainty of someone who has lived long enough to recognize it, that things were going to be all right. Not perfectly, not without more hard days and more difficult rooms and more moments where the right thing cost something. But all right, genuinely, sustainably, undeniably all right. And that was worth every menu, every pot roast, every cup of sweet tea, every moment of standing still in a silent room while a powerful woman said, don't serve him, and choosing, quietly and completely, not to listen. That was worth all of it. Every single Thursday. Monday arrived the way Margaret had known. It would ordinary on the outside, enormous on the inside. And she woke at 5:15, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, the stack of medical bills that had lived on the corner of her counter for 4 months was gone. She had filed the last of the foundation paperwork 3 days ago. The space where those papers had been was just clean counter now. She kept looking at it. The absence of them felt almost as significant as they had. She got dressed carefully, not because she was trying to look like something she wasn't, but because this was the first day of something real, and she wanted to meet it with intention. She drove downtown. She took the elevator. She found her office. Her name was on the placard beside the door, Margaret Whitmore, Director of Employee and Customer Care. She stood in the hallway and looked at it for a long moment. Just looked at it, the way you look at something you need to let become real before you walk through the door. Then she walked through the door. Sandra had set the office up with the basics, a desk, a chair, a plant on the windowsill that Margaret immediately decided she would either keep alive or replace with something she couldn't kill. And a legal pad and two pens and a folder of documents she needed to read. And she sat down. She put her hands flat on the desk. 27 years behind a counter. And now this. She opened the folder. She started reading. And she had been at it for 40 minutes when Daniel knocked on the open door. "How's the chair?" he asked. "It's a good chair," she said. And Sandra picked it specifically. She said, "You've been on your feet for 27 years, and you deserved a chair that made up for some of it." And Margaret looked at the chair with new appreciation. And "Tell Sandra thank you," she said. Daniel came in and sat across from her. And he looked like he had already been at it for hours, which she suspected was accurate. He had the focused forward energy of someone who had shifted into a new gear. And "How much have you read?" he asked. "The culture audit from the last 3 years. And the employee retention reports, the exit interview summaries." She looked at him. "And Daniel, some of these exit interviews." "I know," he said. "And people left because they felt invisible," she said. "And that's the word that keeps coming up. Not overworked. And not underpaid, though both of those are there too. And invisible. They felt like they were producing results for a company that didn't know they existed as people. And that's the problem," he said. "It's not one problem," she said. "And it's 1,000 small ones. A manager who never learned your name after 6 months. And a review process that measured output and never asked how you were doing. And a system that was so focused on the transaction, every transaction, with every customer that it forgot there were people on both sides of it." She tapped the folder. "This is what I'm going to fix." Daniel looked at her, and something in his face settled. "How?" he said. Not a challenge. Genuine question. "From the inside out," she said. And you can't train people to make customers feel valued if those people don't feel valued themselves. And that's backwards. That's always been backwards. You start with the employee. And you make sure they know their name is known. You make sure the person above them can tell you 2 real things about their life. And you build a culture where the question, "Are you okay?" is asked and actually waited on for an answer. She paused. And only then do you talk about customer experience. And because customer experience is downstream of everything else. And Daniel was quiet. "Write that down," he said. "All of it. And everything you just said. That's the foundation document." And "I'm already writing it," she said. He laughed, a real one. And the same short, surprised laugh she had first heard at table 7 when she'd said more sweet tea, and he hadn't expected to find anything funny in that particular evening. And she smiled. "Go run your company," she said. "I have work to do." And he stood. "Margaret," he said at the door. "I'm glad you picked up that menu." And she said. He left. She went back to the folder. The first 3 weeks were harder than she expected and more energizing than she'd feared. And she traveled to 4 locations in the first 10 days. And not as an executive arriving for an inspection, she had been very clear about that from the start. She arrived as someone who wanted to talk to people. And she sat in break rooms. She asked the questions that didn't usually get asked. And what's the hardest part of your day? What's one thing that would make your job feel more worthwhile? When was the last time someone above you said your name and meant it? When was the last time you felt proud of something you did here? And some people were cautious at first. And you developed a radar. And in any workplace, and for the difference between management that asked questions and management that actually listened, and the radar was usually calibrated towards skepticism for good reason. And so she waited. She came back. She followed up on what people had told her, not with immediate sweeping change, but with small specific acknowledgments that said, "I heard you and I remembered." And then they started talking, really talking. A warehouse manager in Nashville told her he had been asking for a second break room for his night shift crew for 2 years. And 2 years of forms and requests and being told it was under review. And she made one phone call. The break room was approved within a week. And a customer service team in Phoenix told her their manager reviewed their calls, but never told them what they were doing right, only what they'd done wrong. And she sat in on 3 reviews and then had a conversation with the manager that was not punitive and not dramatic, but was direct in exactly the way necessary conversations need to be. And in Dallas, she found a restaurant location, not Silver Oak, a different one where the staff turnover had been 60% in 18 months. And she spent 2 days there. She ate lunch in the break room with the kitchen staff. She stayed through the dinner rush and washed dishes when they got backed up and nobody asked her to. At the end of the second day, a 19-year-old line cook named Marcus came up to her and said quietly that his manager made comments that made him feel small, and he had been afraid to report it because he needed the job. She looked at Marcus for a moment. She thought about Alicia, 23 years old with her chin up in a restaurant that was letting the wrong things go unchallenged. She thought about Thomas, Daniel's brother, 41 years old, and afraid to report what was wrong because he needed the job. You're not afraid anymore, she told Marcus. That's why I'm here. The manager was addressed within 48 hours. Not fired, addressed. Because Margaret believed she believed this the way she believed in most things, with the practical and grounded certainty of someone who had watched people long enough to know that most people who behaved badly in positions of small power were not inherently cruel. They were repeating what they had been taught. They were operating in a culture that had told them that this was how you managed. That small cruelties were normal, that fear was a tool. You didn't fix that by removing people. You fixed it by showing them something different and holding them accountable for choosing it. You replaced the model, not just the person. You built slowly and stubbornly, and with enormous patience, a different kind of room. That was the work. It was unglamorous. It was slow. It required the same quality of attention she had brought to a counter for 27 years, just applied now to a much larger counter. She loved it. She hadn't expected to love it quite so completely. 6 weeks in, she called Donna. Donna picked up on the first ring, which meant she had been waiting for this call. How is it? Donna demanded. Hard, Margaret said. Great, both at the same time. That tracks, Donna said. That is the most you thing I've ever heard. How are things at Silver Oak? Margaret asked. A pause. Different, Donna said. Better different. The interim manager they put in, Kevin's, actually stepping up in a way I didn't expect. I don't know. He lost something and found something at the same time. Like he shed a skin. She paused. Alicia got promoted to senior server. Margaret smiled. Good, she said. She told anyone who would listen that you're the reason, Donna said. She says you showed her what it looks like when someone does the job right. She's been saying it so much the new staff thinks you're some kind of legend. Tell her to stop making me a legend and start making herself one, Margaret said. Donna laughed. I'll pass it on, she said. You doing okay? Really? Really, Margaret said. Noah? Walking without the rail, Margaret said. Every time now, Donna was quiet for a beat. Margaret, she said. And her voice had dropped into the register that 22 years of friendship puts in a voice. So glad. Me too, Margaret said. Me too. The twist that nobody saw coming. Not even Margaret happened 8 weeks after she started. On a Thursday evening, Daniel texted her at 6:15. Silver Oak, 7 o'clock if you're free. She looked at the text for a moment. She texted back, I'll be there. She arrived at 6:55. The dinner rush was in full swing. Donna was behind the counter and she looked up when Margaret walked in, and her face did something complicated that ended in a smile. Table 7, Donna said. Table 7, Margaret confirmed. She sat down. At 7:02, the door opened. Daniel walked in. But he wasn't alone. Behind him was a group of men. 8, maybe 9. All of them wearing leather vests. All of them with the particular posture and presence of people who had spent years moving through rooms where they weren't expected. Hell's Angels people. The men he traveled with. The ones Margaret had heard about in pieces over the past 2 months. The veterans group, the home repair worker in struggling neighborhoods, the quiet, sustained showing up that nobody photographed because it wasn't done for cameras. They filled the tables around her. Donna, behind the counter, assessed the situation with the rapid professionalism of a woman who had been in the business for decades and then started taking orders. Daniel sat across from Margaret. He looked different tonight. Not the suit, not the vest. Something in between, just Daniel, just himself. The layers of who he was not arranged for any particular audience. I wanted you to meet them properly, he said, not in a story, in person. She looked around at the men, settling into their chairs, picking up menus, talking to each other with the ease of people who have covered a lot of road together. Why tonight, she said. Because it's Thursday, he said. Earned. Simply, she looked at him. And because he said, 6 months ago, I walked through that door, and a woman I had never met decided to see me clearly. Earned. And it changed everything. And I wanted the people who mattered to me to be in the room where it started. Margaret looked around at the filled tables, at Donna taking orders with the same competence she brought to everything, chatting with a man twice her size who turned out to have a laugh that rattled the windows. Earned. At Alicia's senior server, now moving through the dining room, with the quiet confidence of someone who had found her footing, at table 7, where 2 chairs had been just chairs until they weren't. Earned. She looked at Daniel. Earned. One of them, earned, she said, earned, nodding at the group, earned, is wearing a Thomas patch, earned. She had noticed it. On the vest of the man closest to the window, earned a small patch, a name, Thomas Hayes, Semper Fi. Daniel looked at that table. Earned, we all carry him, he said. His voice had gone quieter. Everyone at these tables. He was the kind of person that he stopped, earned. He was the kind of person that when you lost him, you felt it in the shape of every room afterward. Earned, like something was missing from the air. He paused. Earned, the foundation carries his name. The work carries his name. And yeah, the vest carries his name. Margaret reached across the table. Earned. She put her hand over his. She didn't say anything. Earned. Because some moments don't need words. They just need one person to stay present with another person's grief without trying to fix it or fill it or move past it. Earned. Just staying. Just being there. That was the whole lesson. Earned. It had always been the whole lesson. After a moment, Daniel cleared his throat. Earned. He turned his hand over and squeezed hers briefly and then let go. Earned, sweet tea, he said. Don't push it, she said. That's Donna's job tonight. Earned. He laughed. Donna appeared at the table as if she'd been waiting for exactly this cue, which she probably had. Earned, sweet tea, she said to Daniel. Please, he said. Earned. She looked at Margaret. And for the woman who apparently runs 31 states now? Earned. Coffee, Margaret said. Black. Coming right up, Donna said. And walked away with the efficiency of someone completely in their element. Earned. The dinner moved the way good dinners move, unhurried and full and loud in the right places. Daniel's people turned out to be exactly what he had described across those Thursday evenings. Earned. Not a symbol, not a reputation, people. A man named Ray who had served in Afghanistan and built houses on weekends for families who couldn't afford contractors. Earned. A man named Eddie who was 67 years old and had been riding since he was 19 and called his mother every Sunday without fail. Earned. A man named Curtis who had 3 daughters and coached their soccer team and carried a photo of them in the front pocket of his vest behind the patches. Earned. People, just people. Once you stayed in the room long enough to see them. Earned. At the end of the evening, plates were cleared and the restaurant had begun to thin out. One of the men, Ray, came over to the table and stood there for a moment looking at Margaret with an expression she couldn't immediately read. Earned. Daniel told us about you, he said. About the first night. Earned. Did he, she said. He said you didn't hesitate, Ray said. That you just walked past her and put the menu down. Earned. Didn't think about it. I thought about it, she said. Earned. He raised an eyebrow. For about a second and a half, she said. Earned. But yes, I thought about it. He smiled. It was a good smile. Earned. Earned. He also said you told him that your job was to make people feel like they mattered, Ray said. Earned. And that the day you started deciding who deserved to feel that way was the day the place stopped being worth anything. Earned. Something like that, she said. He nodded slowly. And my last tour, he said. I came home. I had the vest, already had it for years. Earned. And I went into a diner in New Mexico. Just wanted coffee and eggs. Earned. And the woman behind the counter looked at my vest, and she looked at me and she said, just like that, flat, we don't serve your kind. He paused. And I left. I drove 4 hours. I didn't stop anywhere because I was afraid of the next one. He looked at her steadily. And I've carried that for 11 years. And I've been in 100 rooms since then where I could see people running that same calculation when I walked through the door. And most of them did what they decided before I sat down. He paused. Earned. You're the first person who ever asked me to write that story down for a reason that wasn't about me being a case study. Earned. Margaret looked at him. Down, she said. Earned. Daniel said you're building training programs, Ray said. Earned. He said you want real stories, real ones from real people. Earned. Not hypotheticals. She looked at Daniel, who was watching this exchange with the expression of someone who had arranged something carefully and is waiting to see if it lands the way he hoped. And you told him about the training program, she said. And I may have mentioned it, Daniel said. She looked back at Ray. And would you be willing, she said, to tell that story? And in your own words, to people who need to hear it. And Ray was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said, yeah, I would. And then yes, Margaret said, I want it. I want all of their stories if they're willing. That's exactly what the training needs. Not a policy statement about dignity. And a person standing in a room saying, this is what it felt like when someone got it wrong. And this is what it felt like when someone got it right. And Ray nodded. He went back to his table. Margaret looked at Daniel. And you planned this, she said. I facilitated it, he said. There's a difference. Is there? I'm choosing to believe there is, he said. And she shook her head, but she was smiling. The restaurant emptied slowly. And the way good evenings empty, not rushed, but naturally in their own time. And Daniel's group said their goodbyes with handshakes and a few words and the easy warmth of people who didn't need to perform their affection because it was simply there. And Donna turned chairs onto tables. Alicia did the final wipe down of the counter. And Daniel and Margaret were the last ones sitting. He looked at the table for a moment. And same table, she agreed, 6 months ago. And 6 months ago, he looked at her. Do you know what I thought, he said, when you sat down across from me that first night? When I said you didn't have to do that and you said, sure I did? And what did you think, she said. I thought this is what it's supposed to feel like, he said. And a person being treated like a person. And I thought, how has it taken me this long to find a room where that's just what someone does, automatically, and without calculation, without performing it? He paused. And I've been in $1,000 a plate dinners where I felt less seen than I did at this table. And she looked at him. That's because $1,000 plate is about the transaction, she said. And it always has been. The food, the atmosphere, the status of being the kind of person who is in that room. And it's a transaction dressed up as an experience. She looked at the table, the worn surface, the chairs that had held 30 years of people. And this is just a table. And you were just a person who needed to sit down. That's all it ever has to be. He held her gaze for a long moment. And you know what the work you're doing is going to do, he said. And if it works. If we build it right and we protect it right, and we don't let it get watered down into corporate language and policy documents nobody reads, do you know what it's going to do? And tell me, she said. It's going to make more of you, he said. And in every location, in every break room, and every counter, and every table. And it's going to build people who know how to pick up the menu and carry it across the room. She looked at him. That's all I want, she said. That's the whole job. And make more people who pick up the menu, he smiled. And she smiled. And outside that restaurant, the world kept being exactly what it always was, complicated and hard and full of rooms where people were still being turned away, still being looked through, still being reduced to a symbol on a vest or a number on a bill or a category decided before anyone bothered to ask their name. But inside Silver Oak, on a Thursday evening, at table 7, two people sat across from each other and knew what they were going to do about it. Not everything, not all at once, not with perfection or without setback or immune to the weight of how much work remained, but something, the kind of something that starts with one person paying attention, the kind of something that compounds quietly over years until the rooms begin to change and the people in them begin to see each other differently. And the next Margaret Whitmore, whoever she is, wherever she's standing with a menu in her hand and a room full of people watching to see what she'll do, she'll know. She'll know she is not alone. She'll know the path has been walked before. And she'll walk past the doubt and the pressure and the voice that says don't. And she will carry the menu across the room and set it down and say, sit down, sweetheart, and mean every word. Because that is what kindness does. It does not disappear when it's done. It does not spend itself and leave nothing behind. It builds, quietly, stubbornly, across rooms and years and tables, and every ordinary Thursday night where someone is tired and far from home and the whole room has already decided not to see them. Kindness builds, and what it builds lasts longer than fear ever could. That is the only thing worth knowing. And Margaret Whitmore knew it. She had known it for 27 years. She had proven it in 5 seconds. And she would spend the rest of her life making sure no one ever forgot it.